Kant believes that people should act freely of their obligation to society or to other people. This is evident in Kant's metaphysics when he says, "When we act, whether or not we achieve what we intend with our actions is often beyond our control. So the morality of our actions does not depend upon their outcome. What we can control, however, is the will behind the action. The morality of an action, therefore, must be assessed in terms of the motivation behind it."
Kant asserts that people are to act based upon reason and avoid being controlled by emotion. He states in Metaphysics, moderation in emotions and passions, self-control and calm deliberation not only are good in many ways, but seem even to constitute part of the person's inner worth. For without the principles of a good will, they can become extremely bad. For example, a villain's coolness makes him far more dangerous and more straightforwardly abominable to us than he would otherwise have seemed.
Kant's philosophy argues that human dignity must be respected, as people are ends, and should not be used as a means to an end. In his book he says, that is because all rational beings stand under the law, that each of them should treat himself and all others, never merely as a mean, but always also as an end in himself. Kant also goes on to discuss the value of one's dignity, saying, "Let the value of such a turn of mind be recognized as dignity, or intrinsic value, and puts it indefinitely above any price to compare it with, or weigh it against. Things that have price would also be to violate its holiness, as it were."
Kant believes that the intention behind one's action determines the moral worth rather than the result of the action. In his book, he states, "When we act, whether or not we achieve what we intend with our actions is often beyond our control, so the morality of our actions does not depend upon the outcome. What we can control, however, is the will behind the action. The morality of an action, therefore, must be assessed in terms of the motivation behind it."
The morality of the characters are determined by a scale of -8 to 8 on the y-axis. We base this on the 4 separate aspects of Kant's moral philosophy regarding obligation, human dignity, emotion, and intention. Each of the plot points of Chillingworth and Dimmesdale was ranked on a scale of -2 to 2 for each of the individual aspects of Kant, based upon how strictly the event constituted moral worth. If the event embodies moral worth from Kant's perspective, then the morality would be a positive number. If it opposed Kant, then the morality would be given as a negative value. For the obligation aspect, 1 on the scale is when the obligation relates to a person. For 2, it is related to the society, which has a greater magnitude, since society shows a greater extent on obligation. Human dignity, however, can only be evaluated through whether it is preserved or not, giving it the scale of -2 for hurting human dignity and +2 for defending it. As for emotion, 1 signifies that the person was being partially controlled by reason and emotion, while 2 means that the person was completely ruled by either their emotion or their reason. The other aspect, intention, has the scale of 1 being only the thought, contrasting to 2, which includes the intention carried out as an action. On each of the individual aspects, a 0 indicates that the particular aspect does not apply to the event, or it may indicate that the character's positive and negative morality in that event cancels out.
In Chapter 10, there is a flashback to when Chillingworth is characterized as a moral and truth-seeking man before the beginning of the book. Old Roger Chillingworth, throughout life, had been calm in temperament, kindly, though not of warm affections, but ever, and in all his relations with the world, a pure and upright man. In this situation, Chillingworth is not influenced by any of his obligations to either society or people. Therefore, obligation is not applicable for Chillingworth, and so the obligation value is 0. Chillingworth does not infringe upon human dignity, nor respect it. Therefore, human dignity is not applicable for Chillingworth, and the value is 0. He is not influenced by emotion in this stage of his life. He only acts based upon reason and is not affected by the surrounding events. It is a positive 2 rather than a 1, because emotion has absolutely no significance in his life at that moment. His intentions are honest and true, and he does not have any ulterior motives. His morality is positive 2 because he lived and carried out actions based upon his good intentions. In chapter 10, there is a reference to the beginning of Chillingworth's life, when he realizes that Hester has committed adultery. He had begun an investigation, as he imagined, with the severe and equal integrity of a judge, desirous only of truth, instead of human passions and wrongs inflicted on himself. Regarding obligation, Chillingworth is following society's outlines of how to act and how he had been only seeking justice, but transitions to make the decision to begin to seek revenge. Society's beliefs support Chillingworth's justification for seeking the truth and desiring to know who wronged him. In this event, human dignity does not apply because he neither violates it nor respects it. Therefore, the value of human dignity is 0 because it is not applicable for Chillingworth. Chillingworth evidently begins his investigation by only seeking justice with a rational mindset, but he then shifts to make decisions based upon his desire for revenge. His thirst for truth is gradually overcome by his feelings of animosity. Because he still has a partially rational thought process, his morality is positive 1. Both Chillingworth's intentions, carried out through action and thought, were pure and lacked any goal to harm society. He had the intention of helping society by carrying out justice so that society could learn from the mistakes of Hester's fellow sinner. Thus, his intention value is positive 2 on the morality scale. In chapter 4, Chillingworth expresses his rage toward Hester's fellow sinner through the conversation with Hester in the prison. I shall seek this man as I have sought truth in books. I shall see him tremble. I shall feel myself shudder suddenly and unawares. Sooner or later, he must needs be mine. Chillingworth continues to justify his endeavors as an obligation to society in order to reveal this reality of the sinful act. However, he is slowly beginning to ignore society's influence as he is making it more of a personal pursuit for sadistic pleasure, causing the value to be -1. Chillingworth has no association with regards to human dignity because he does not oppose nor respect it. Thus, human dignity is not applicable for Chillingworth, and he receives a score of 0. Chillingworth has become an animalistic individual that has been consumed by his emotions and hunger for the truth. Chillingworth says that he will make himself shudder, meaning that he is willing to betray his own morals in order to take revenge. He says that he will make himself suddenly shudder, revealing that he expects himself to submit to his emotions entirely. Although he is desirous of the truth, he allows his mission to be fully revolved around his desire for revenge and loses sight of justice. Even though he consciously makes the decision, his reasoning has already been skewed by his emotions, so it is a -2. Even though Chillingworth has not found Hester's fellow sinner yet, he still actively tries to figure out who the man is through his status as a physician in society. In being Dimmesdale's physician, he also shows that he has an ulterior motive. He seeks the truth by other means and utilizes the people that he encounters to further his understanding of the adulterous sin that Hester committed. Because this is only his thought, not an action carried out by his intentions, it is -1.
When Dimmesdale and Chillingworth start living together, Chillingworth begins to develop a suspicion that Dimmesdale is Hester's fellow sinner when he readily assented and went on with his medical supervision of the minister with a mysterious and puzzled smile on his lips. I must needs look deeper into it, a strange sympathy betwixt soul and body. Chillingworth does not feel any influence from society or from other people, so obligation is not applicable. He also does not harm or protect anyone, so human dignity is not applicable for Chillingworth either in this scene. Chillingworth no longer displays any rational thought as he starts making poor decisions based upon a reasoning that has been skewed by this desire to take revenge. He insinuates that he is only checking up on Dimmesdale's welfare by saying that something must be plaguing Dimmesdale, but in actuality, he just wants to verify his suspicion as evident in his sadistic smile. However, even though Chillingworth has sadistic thoughts by wanting to torture Hester's fellow sinner, he does not carry out these thoughts through his actions yet, so it's a -1. When Dimmesdale goes onto the scaffolding with Hester, Chillingworth suspects that Dimmesdale will reveal himself, so he yells at Dimmesdale, "Wave back that woman, cast off this child, all shall be well. Do not blacken your fame and perish in dishonor. I can save you yet. Would you bring infamy on your sacred profession?" Chillingworth did not have an obligation to society or to other people to yell at Dimmesdale and Hester, so obligation is not applicable. Chillingworth was trying to harm Dimmesdale by slyly telling him not to reveal himself so that Dimmesdale would still have to live in his guilt. At this point, Chillingworth is purely motivated by his emotion. He no longer has any other purpose in his life than to make Dimmesdale suffer. He knows that if Dimmesdale reveals himself, Chillingworth will no longer be able to enjoy and elongate Dimmesdale's suffering. Chillingworth means to have Dimmesdale not reveal himself so that he can carry on torturing the minister. He carries out those intentions by yelling at Dimmesdale not to stand up next to Hester. After Chillingworth dies, it is noted that Chillingworth bequeaths a very considerable amount of property, both here and in England, to little Pearl, the daughter of Hester Prynne. Chillingworth was acting out of free will and without any obligation to society or to another person because he actually was going against the Puritan morals by dying rich and then giving his money away. He does not harm or protect anyone, so human dignity is not applicable for Chillingworth in this scenario. Chillingworth could have benefited society by giving his money away, but instead he wanted to keep all his money and then later decides to give it to Pearl because he finally acknowledges her as his daughter. He also displays reasoning as he gives Pearl his money as an attempt to make amends with Dimmesdale, as Dimmesdale is now dead and Pearl is Dimmesdale's child. Chillingworth has good intentions when giving his estate to Pearl as an attempt to make up for his past when he caused Dimmesdale to suffer.
Before the book starts, Dimmesdale commits adultery. Dimmesdale had an obligation to Hester to guide her spiritually and morally as her minister. However, he went against that obligation by committing the act of sin with her. In a quote from Scarlet letter on page 222, Dimmesdale states, "It may be that when we forgot our God, when we violated our reverence each for the other's soul." At the end, Dimmesdale admits that he failed to preserve human dignity in any sense when he commits adultery. He uses Hester as a means to an end rather than viewing her as a person. Kant highly values the preservation of human dignity, so by using Hester rather than regarding her as a person, Dimmesdale earns a -2. Dimmesdale completely falls victim to his emotions when he commits adultery. He acts upon an emotional impulse and doesn't display any reason in the occurrence. Through this, he decreases his morality. Kant believes that one is not moral when being controlled by something other than rationale, such as emotion or addiction. Since Dimmesdale is not thinking in any rational manner, he earns a score of -2. Dimmesdale has no true intentions when committing adultery. He was acting impulsively, so he was not thinking about the consequences of the action. Dimmesdale had no alternative intention since he was fueled by his desire. In Chapter 3, Dimmesdale gives a speech toward Hester, encouraging her to reveal her accomplice, since he is not strong enough. "Be not silent from any mistaken pity and tenderness for him. For, believe me, Hester, though he were to step down from a high place and stand there beside thee on thy pedestal of shame, yet it better so than to hide a guilty heart through life. What can thy silence do for him, except tempt him, compel him, as it were, to add hypocrisy to sin. Dimmesdale feels obligated to make this speech. He follows his obligation to society as a preacher to ask Hester to reveal who she committed adultery with, even though he does not want to be revealed. By submitting to his obligations, Dimmesdale does not act as he thinks is rational, which according to Kant is immoral, earning him the score -2. Dimmesdale does not preserve nor harm human dignity in this speech. He does not use anyone as a means to an end, yet he regards everyone as people with moral worth, although that is not his purpose or within his consideration at the time. This makes the argument of human dignity irrelevant in this matter. Dimmesdale is partially ruled by his emotions as he desperately attempts to directly communicate to Hester while talking to the society as a whole. He does display reason as he hides his true intentions during the speech to the colony, demanding that Hester reveal the name of her accomplice. However, his emotion is seen as he also reveals how he desires for Hester to say his name due to his inability. Dimmesdale has the intention of remaining silent, but tells the society that the sinner should reveal himself, and that revealing oneself would be better than hiding, contradicting himself. He actually remains silent, so it's -2. In Chapter 8, the elders debate whether or not to take Pearl from Hester. Dimmesdale then chooses to side with Hester by saying that Hester should be allowed to keep Pearl. She recognizes, believe me, the solemn miracle which God hath wrought in the existence of that child, for Hester Prynne's sake, then, and no less for the poor child's sake, let us leave them as Providence hath seen fit to place them. Dimmesdale does not regard his obligations to society at all, as he chooses to act in a way that he believes would be moral, in defending Hester's right to raise Pearl. Dimmesdale is abiding by his obligation to Hester and to Pearl, as he is the father. Because Dimmesdale ignores the obligation to society, his moral worth would be a +2, but since he also obeys his obligation to Hester and Pearl, his moral worth would decrease by 1, so his moral worth would be +1. Dimmesdale preserves human dignity to the full extent in the sense that he helps Hester keep Pearl, which he knows would help them both, by preserving the value of people rather than have them serve as an example for society. Dimmesdale preserves human dignity. Dimmesdale is partially ruled by emotion as he makes the plea for Hester to keep Pearl. Dimmesdale understands that it would be best if Hester kept Pearl, but he also feels partly guilty and responsible since he is Pearl's father, and has not helped Hester since they committed adultery. Because the emotion is affecting his decision, he earns a score -1. Dimmesdale has pure intentions when making his decision to defend Pearl. He was not guided by false intentions, he only wanted to act in a way that he felt was moral. Kant believes that the intent behind one's action is what constitutes moral worth, so in choosing to defend Hester and Pearl, his moral worth is based upon attention is 2.
In Chapter 11, after Dimmesdale declares that he has attempted to expose his sin on multiple occasions, the narrator reveals that because Dimmesdale could not relieve his agony by confessing to the society, Dimmesdale harms himself. In Mr. Dimmesdale's secret closet under lock and key, there was a bloody scourge. In this situation, Dimmesdale isn't influenced by his obligation to the people or the society, so he receives a score of 0. Dimmesdale physically harms himself, using himself as a means to relieve the suffering he feels due to his choice to withhold the truth. But because he does not respect his own human dignity, he scores a 2. Dimmesdale was motivated to hurt himself based upon the burden of his guilt, but at the time he displays an aspect of reason, as he knows that in order to benefit the society, he must bear his shame in secret, receiving a score of -1. Although Dimmesdale harms himself, he has honest intentions. He violates his own human dignity, but if he had revealed his sin In order to alleviate his suffering, it would have been seen as something done with good intentions. So it's a 2. In chapter 20, Dimmesdale returns to the forest feeling rebellious towards society's expectations. At every step, he was incited to do some strange, wild, wicked thing or other, with the sense that it would be once involuntary and intentional, in spite of himself, yet growing out of a profounder self than that which opposed the impulse. Dimmesdale has an obligation to be a role model to the people, which he ignores as he leaves the forest. He is thinking freely of his obligations to society and only thinks of acting based upon the impulses of that moment. His thoughts reveal that his desire to impulsively corrupt the people and receive the gratification of observing their pain, which completely opposes the Puritan values. Because Kant believes that we are to act independent of our obligation, Dimmesdale receives a 2. Dimmesdale resists the temptation and doesn't actually take action to either hurt or defend the children. So based upon respecting human dignity, Dimmesdale's moral worth is a 0. Dimmesdale demonstrates how he was able to achieve the balance between reason and emotion. He has the impulse to act freely, so he was not entirely a character based upon reason. Yet he was also able to overcome the impulse and do what he believed is right, earning a score of 0. Dimmesdale has the intention to act in a mischievous manner, but since he does not enact his thoughts, his morality is a -1 rather than a -2. Towards the end of the book, Dimmesdale realizes he is dying and chooses to finally reveal that Pearl is his child. After exhausting life in his efforts for mankind's spiritual good, he had made the manner of his death a parable, in order to impress on his admirers the mighty and mournful lesson that, in view of infinite purity, we are all sinners alike. Dimmesdale goes against his societal obligations of representing the perfect Puritan role model, but by revealing his sin, he directly opposed the foundational Puritan belief that they are to be absolutely perfect. By exposing himself, he also opposes the traditional punishment of shaming, as he received sympathy from the people, so it is a 2. Human dignity does not apply in this situation, so Dimmesdale receives a 0 on this aspect of Kant. Dimmesdale's reveal of his shame was based upon his reason, as he intentionally reveals that he committed adultery right before he dies, in order to teach the people that we are all sinners alike. Dimmesdale intentionally exposes himself before he dies, saying, "I am a dying man, so let me make haste to take my shame upon me." The timing indicates that his suffering and struggle did have an aspect of reason in it, as he was trying to illustrate this to the people. But his emotion is also displayed, as he had trembled and turned to Hester with an expression of doubt and anxiety, and also a feeble smile on his lips, as he exposed the secret. Dimmesdale has honest intentions when he reveals himself and when Pearl gives him the kiss he asked for in order to free himself. He also asks for the kiss to show that he is no longer publicly denying that he is her father, accepting his responsibility for the existence of Pearl, so he receives a 2 on the morality scale.
Chillingworth's and Dimmesdale's levels of morality intersect around chapter 4. Chillingworth's morality is decreasing as he becomes obsessed with finding out who slept with Hester. He falls victim to his emotions as he starts to be portrayed in a devilish manner. Dimmesdale battles with accepting his sin as he improves society by becoming relatable to everyone else as a sinner. This intersection is significant as it is the point where Dimmesdale's moral worth starts to become greater overall and continues to be greater than Chillingworth's, whose moral worth decreases overall and remains lower, even when he attempts to redeem himself in the end.
In chapters 10 to 11, Chillingworth and Dimmesdale both decrease in morality. As Chillingworth's morality decreases, he affects Dimmesdale's morality by forcing him into further guilt, eventually pushing him to harm himself with the scourge. In chapters 23 to 24, Chillingworth and Dimmesdale both increase in morality. After Dimmesdale increases in morality with his reveal and his death, Chillingworth's morality also increases because he no longer has anyone to be malicious towards. His morality increases because he no longer has any ill intentions towards anyone.